Shabbat Shalom. As you heard just a few moments ago, we announced the new Hebrew month of Nisan, which means that Pesach is approaching. But of course, you already knew that if you've walked down the aisle of a grocery store and seen matzah and macaroons on sale. And so as we turn our attention to Passover, I'd like us to consider what is the most important part of the Seder. I don't mean the brisket or the gathering of family and friends. I mean the Seder itself. What's the most important moment? Maybe it is the 4 questions that turn just an ordinary dinner party into an educational salon. Perhaps it's the symbols of the Seder plate that tell the Passover story, or it might be singing Hallel to celebrate our freedom, or opening the door of Elijah as we pray for the Messianic era when all people will be free. You can make a good argument for many parts of the Seder, but for me this year, perhaps the most important part is a short phrase that appears just before the second cup of wine is drunk. So it's kind of coming close to dinner. Our stomachs are starting to growl at that point, and so we might have kind of skipped it over or not noticed it in previous years. But this year, I recommend that we pause to consider it, because it holds a powerful message about our place in the world as Jews and our purpose in the world as Jews. Our place and our purpose. I'm speaking of the phrase, in each and every generation, a person is to see themselves as if they left Egypt. B'chol dor vador hayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. Now why? Why are we supposed to consider ourselves as if we escaped slavery? On a simple level, the Haggadah is asking us to make history come alive, to make an ancient story our own story. We all might be living comfortably in Minnesota or in Montreal and not in Mitzrayim, but we are to identify with the experience of our biblical ancestors, the experience of oppression and liberation. And the point is, so that we take the lesson of Pesach to heart. Over and over, the Torah tells us, do not oppress the stranger. Do not mistreat the orphan and the widow, for you were strangers in a strange land. Ki gerim haitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. You see, slavery could have left us bitter and angry and wounded. Instead, b'chol dor vador, in each and every generation, we are to turn memory into empathy. Empathy is to animate our commitment to the dignity and well-being of the weak and the vulnerable. And so at the Seder, we recall our suffering to renew our sense of purpose, to live with compassion and to pursue justice. What about our place? A modern adaptation of this prayer challenges how we are to see ourselves as Jews in the world. The adaptation appears in a new Haggadah written in the aftermath of October 7th, when Hamas attacked Israel. Chayav Adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mi be'eri, mikfar Aza, misterot, mi'ofakim. In each and every generation, a person is to see themselves as if they came out of Be'eri, of Kfar Aza, of Sderot, and of Ofakim. If you're not familiar, these are the names of the towns and kibbutzim close to Gaza that faced the brunt of the attack. The town where hundreds of men, women, and children, civilians and soldiers were slaughtered, but where some people, luckily and miraculously, survived. So what would it mean to say that each of us is to consider ourselves as having left the worst pogrom in the history of the Jewish people since the Holocaust? It means that the fathers and the mothers who were slaughtered are our parents. The brothers and sisters killed before their eyes are our siblings. The sons and daughters burned alive are our children, and that the people taken captive are our family and our friends. It means that the homes and the communities which were decimated are our homes. Just as we are to identify with our Israelite ancestors, this new adaptation calls on us to identify with our Israeli brothers and sisters. But the point is not just to feel their pain, but to draw out a critical lesson. From Egypt, the lesson was compassion. From Be'eri, it is vigilance. We're not to live in a state of eternal fear as Jews in the world, but to bear in mind that as Jews, our place in this world is never quite secure. Not in the US, and not even in Israel. We are vulnerable just by virtue of being Jews. Therefore, we must take precautions and make decisions that safeguard our own well-being. Yossi Klein Halevi, an American-Israeli author and public intellectual, speaks about two kinds of Jews in a way that feels parallel to this lesson of leaving Egypt and leaving Be'eri. There are two kinds of Jews, he says, Purim Jews and Pesach Jews. Purim Jews well understand the history of our people. They know that there are Hamans and Hamasniks who seek our destruction, and they don't underestimate their willingness to try. They're motivated by the very real threat to our own existence. Pesach Jews, on the other hand, try to live up to the Torah's highest aspiration, to use the lesson of subjugation to fight for liberation. They seek to uphold the mitzvah to love the stranger. And these Jews have been on the front lines marching for freedom for all who are oppressed. Purim and Be'eri implore us, don't be naive. Pesach in Egypt implore us, but don't be brutal. Klein Halevi writes, both are essential. One without the other creates an unbalanced Jewish personality and a distortion of Jewish history and values. One reason the Palestinian issue is so wrenching, he concludes, is that it is the point at which the two commands converge. The stranger in our midst is represented by a national movement that wants to usurp us. Now, I don't know how to reconcile these two things, the commandment to have compassion with the obligation to ensure our own survival. Politicians and strategists and activists have been debating and struggling with that for decades, but I do know that we need both. We need to embody compassion. The tragedy unfolding in Gaza is heartbreaking. There are thousands and thousands of dead. Now, we should not for 1 minute shift the blame. Hamas, as I've said many times, is ultimately responsible. In their bloodthirsty quest to destroy Israel, they have squandered the opportunity to establish a thriving Palestinian state in Gaza when Israel handed over the keys. And they embed themselves among civilians specifically to increase the civilian toll. Still, as much as Israel tries to avoid it, there are innocent children who, through no fault of their own, are hungry and homeless and orphans. And we are called upon to have and to act with compassion, to see and to sense their pain, their trauma, their grief, and their hopelessness. And at the same time, we need to be vigilant. For us in the US, that means security guards at our front doors and a security campaign now going on to pay for it. For Israel, that means acting with force against Hamas in Gaza and terrorists in the West Bank, not to mention Hezbollah and Iran. That means addressing the fact that UN-funded schools have for decades taught vile Jew hatred, sowing the seeds for this massacre and anti-Semitism for generations to come. That means making diplomatic decisions about Palestinian independence, which in theory I support, with Israel's security first and foremost in mind. Chaverim, today on this Shabbat Mevarchim, We stand directly between Purim and Pesach. We are not yet out of Egypt. We are not yet out of Be'eri. But we're called upon to picture ourselves going forth from both, and not just leaving, but taking with us the lessons of Egypt and Be'eri, our unwillingness to give up on compassion or to give in to naivete. Thus, may this prayer in the Haggadah be realized. A person should see themselves as leaving Egypt, as leaving Be'eri, so that we may go forth from bondage to redemption, miyagon l'simcha, mi'evel l'yom tov, from misery to joy, from mourning to rejoicing, me'or gadol, me'afela le'or gadol, from darkness to great light. In Omar, amen. To you. Let's turn back in our Sidurim. We'll invite Zach to come forward again. Page 155 for Musaf.